Well, good afternoon, morning, evening, whatever it is in your world. So today, in order to sort of introduce the nature of philosophy, first I want to talk about the word. So here we go. Philosophy. The way we use it in English, or actually the way we tend to use it today, is people will say things like, my philosophy of this is, or the corporate philosophy of that is, which is really not the correct way to use it. The modern connotation, or denotation that is, of philosophy really is this, that it is a study of the whole. And so what do we mean by that? Well, when we say whole, we mean, in other words, all knowledge. We tend to discount some types of knowledge. For instance, there's the type of knowledge that's practical, that we use for work in our everyday lives, that kind of thing. There's speculative, where we come up with ways of knowing things that we can't be absolutely sure of. There's mathematical knowledge, there's emotional knowledge, there's all kinds of knowledge. But philosophy deals with them all. And so one of the problems in understanding all knowledge is that sometimes there's a lot of knowledge we don't care about at a certain time in our lives, and so we tend to think of it as not important. But so the word philosophy, here's the thing. So philo is a Greek word. Philosophy comes from Greek, as does a lot of stuff. And philo is a type of love. And then there's Sophia in Greek, the Sophie part, Sophia, which means wisdom. And so literally, philosophy means the love of wisdom. And this phrase was first coined by Socrates in about the 4th or 5th century BC. And the love of wisdom, because here's the deal, right, is that wisdom is about all knowledge. So if you know a lot about baseball cards, that doesn't make you wise. If you know a lot about investment, that doesn't make you wise. Wisdom is about understanding all of knowledge. That's sort of the deal. Now, the way that Socrates understood this, when he said that philosophy is the love of knowledge, there's a distinction that we can make that will help us understand what he meant by that. And essentially, how it goes is, boy, there's got to be a better way. I'll figure this thing out. I just recently got this little pad thing. I'm still kind of figuring it out. Okay, but anyway. So, in terms of knowledge, we can divide knowledge into philosophy versus sophistry. And the deal is this. They both come from the word Sophia. You'll see sophistry and philosophy as we just spoke about, right? But the idea is, as we discovered, right, philosophy is the love of wisdom, whereas sophistry, or the sophist, is one who possesses wisdom. And so, in other words, what you're saying is, if you're talking about sophistry or a sophist, this is a person who is reputed wise. In other words, people think they're wise and they claim to be wise. But the idea here is that these guys, philosophers, are those who search for knowledge. Well, or we'll say wisdom. Search for knowledge and wisdom. And so the idea is this. If you think about it, can I change colors here? Nah, I don't know. I'll figure it out. Wait, let's go down here. Okay, just forget it. So if you think about it, here's the deal, right? If we're talking about the love of wisdom, if you love something, that means you desire it. If you desire something, that means you want it. If you want something, that's because you don't have it, right? Whereas here, if you're saying that you are reputed wise, you believe already that you are wise. So in other words, this is the person who is, shall we say, intellectually humble. How about that? In other words, they admit that they don't know things. And when you admit you don't know, that means you are ready to learn. Whereas this guy is a guy who tends to be intellectually closed. Especially if what you're doing is something that gets you paid. So in his time in ancient Greece, sophists were professional teachers. These were guys who would go around and be paid to give people wisdom or to make them wise. Whereas the philosophers were people who simply went around searching by asking questions, if that kind of makes sense. Another way to sort of come at this, you could say then that these guys are the professionals. So these guys are professional wise guys, whereas these guys are amateur wise guys. And when we say amateur, here's another thing. If you think about the difference between professional and amateurs in athletics, right? We have to think of amateur as somehow lesser or not as skilled or whatever the case may be, right? And professional is someone ultimately who gets paid. That's the major difference, right? But this word amat in Latin is love. So amateur literally means lover. So the idea would be that someone who is an amateur does it because they love the game, not for the money. Well, obviously today it's a little slick. We used to be able to say, you know, college football, you don't get paid, but you just do it because you love it. Well, maybe you don't actually get a, you know, official paycheck, but whatever, that's just today. But the distinction still stands. So in other words, the thing to take with us here is that philosophy is about the constant search for wisdom. And philosophers do it because they love knowledge. But the whole thing is about acquiring knowledge. And if, on the other hand, we believe ourselves to be wise already, then we're likely not going to ask a whole lot of questions, because the more questions that we ask of ourselves, the more likely it is that we're going to think that what we already know is actually not knowledge, but merely opinion. So anyway, that's the major distinction between philosophy and sophistry, which really helps us to understand the term.